So unified growth theory attempts to understand the process of development in its entirety. Much of the inequality, as we see it today, is originated in forces that operated in the distant past. If we would like to mitigate inequality across the globe, we would like to expedite the transition of less developed societies into the modern growth regime, we have to design a policy that is country-specific, history-specific, geography-specific in order to expedite the transition. I expect rapid technological progress, greater prosperity, but unfortunately, this prosperity will be divided very unevenly across the population.
Hello everyone, welcome to SFC Markets and Finance. For most of our history, people have been long trapped in stagnation. What has triggered the dramatic metamorphosis in people's livelihood over the past 2 centuries? And what are the reasons behind the emergence of vast inequality across the world? With those questions in mind, let's welcome Dr. Oded Galor, a very influential and admired economist, author and the professor of economics at Brown University, to join us in today's conversation. Hello, Dr. Galor. It is a great pleasure to have you here with us today. In your new book, The Journey of Humanity, The Origins of Wealth and Inequality, you have described how human societies across the globe have made the transition from stagnation to growth. In your opinion, what are the key factors that have driven this transition?
So, the journey of humanity, as you said, explores the evolution of human societies since the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa nearly 300,000 years ago. And it attempts to decipher 2 fundamental mysteries, what I defined as the mystery of growth, namely this incredible transformation in income per capita and the standard of living that is occurring in the past 200 years after literally hundreds of thousands of years of stagnation. Why is it the case that in the past 200 years, income per capita in the world economy increases 14-fold after near stagnation for 300,000-year period? And in addition, we try to address the mystery of inequality, namely to understand why do we observe this vast inequality in the wealth of nations? Why some countries are poor and others are rich? And why do we see this incredible increase in the gap between nations in the past 200 years? So, related to your question, so over the entire course of human existence, over 99.9% of human existence, societies are in a Malthusian epoch. During this time period, technological progress is permitting families to expand due to the fact that child mortality is declining and fertility is increasing. So when technology is advancing over most of human existence, it permits greater population growth. But this implies that this population is ultimately not richer than the population that existed before. Namely, when technology is advancing, it generates more people, but not richer people. And this lasts over 99.9% of human existence, over the entire period that we define as the Malthusian epoch. But interestingly, the Malthusian epoch is characterized by important dualism. On the one hand, we see stagnation in income per capita. But on the other hand, we see great dynamism in the context of technology, in the context of population, and in the context of the adaptation of the human population to its technological environment. So when humanity emerges in Africa 300,000 years ago, and humanity, unlike other species, is equipped with a powerful brain, people are innovating. When they innovate, resources are expanding and more people can be supported. But as I said, not richer people. But given the fact that there are more people around, there are more potential innovators. More potential innovators implies more technological progress that supports more people. So over the course of human existence, we see the wheels of change that are governing the journey of humanity, the interaction between technological progress and the human population that is accelerating gradually. And despite this acceleration, there is no change in income per capita. But ultimately, after 300,000-year period, society is moving from stone tool technologies to steam engine technologies, and the technological environment is changing very, very rapidly. And the rate of technological progress is reaching a tipping point beyond which, in order to cope with this rapidly changing technological environment, humanity starts to invest in human capital. People start to invest in the education of their children. But people are very poor. They have to economize on the number of children. So this investment in education generates a fertility decline. And it is this fertility decline that frees the growth process from the counterbalancing effect of population. Namely, unlike the forces that operated in the Malthusian epoch, in which technological progress was converted into more people, suddenly, in the past 200 years, we see the technological progress is starting to convert into richer people. Okay? So as I said, to summarize, it is the acceleration in technological progress that brings about a rapid change in the technological environment that induces parents to invest in education. This investment is generating a fertility decline, and the fertility decline frees the growth process from the counterbalancing effect of population and permits the world to move into the era of sustained economic growth.
He points out that prior analysis considered the modern era of economic growth and the Malthusian epoch of stagnation as two distinct and disjointed phenomena, rather than as a unified whole. So in what ways, by contrast, does the unified growth theory better helps us understand the forces behind economic growth and prosperity?
Indeed. So unified growth theory attempts to understand the process of development in its entirety, namely to link processes that occurred in the past to certain processes that are present today. And it was developed based on the conviction that a significant portion of the inequality, as we see it today, is originated in the distant past. So as I argued, 200 years ago, inequality in the world economy was insignificant. And in the course of this transition from stagnation to growth, we see this enormous divergence in the wealth of nations. And therefore, much of the inequality, as we see today, is originated in forces that operated in the distant past. Now, conventional growth theory focuses on either the modern growth regime or the Malthusian epoch. By focusing only on the modern growth regime, these models assumed already that societies made a transition from stagnation to growth, and now they are simply enjoying convergence in income per capita. But this prevented these theories from realizing that, in fact, much of the inequality in the world economy today is originated in the past 200 years and is based on this divergence that occurred in the world economy rather than the convergence that occurred in the world economy. So the virtues of unified growth theory is that it captures the process of development in its entirety, and therefore it allows us to understand how initial conditions that existed in the distant past are affecting economic development today. Namely, how the size of the human population, say in Africa 300,000 years ago, contributed to technological progress, how technological progress contributed to the human population, and how this interaction of the wheels of change brought about ultimately a rapid change in technological environment that permitted the transition from stagnation to growth, but ultimately brought about an incredible inequality across the globe. So in the absence of a unified theory of economic growth, we cannot understand most of the inequality that exists today, because the inequality that exists today is not a byproduct of the modern growth regime. It is a byproduct of what existed in the distant past, before the emergence of the modern growth regime.
Does economic growth inevitably lead to the emergence of inequality?
Yeah, so this is an interesting observation. Indeed, the inequality that we see across the globe today is a byproduct of the transition from stagnation to growth. So when society started to move from stagnation to growth, when this tipping point was reached, this tipping point was not reached universally across the globe. Some societies experienced these transitions 200 years ago and even slightly earlier, and other societies only very recently. And consequently, given the fact that this transition was associated with a 14-fold increase in income per capita on average in the world, those societies that took off 200 years earlier than others magnified their wealth relative to the rest of the societies, and an incredible inequality emerged in the world economy. So yes, unambiguously, it is this transition from stagnation to growth that brought about the inequality that we see across the globe.
Your unified growth theory suggests that the transition from stagnation to growth is the inevitable outcome of the process of development. But why some societies have been more successful than others in improving the well-being of their populations? Can a better understanding of the reasons behind help us to bridge the inequality gap to some extent?
Right. So you're asking two important questions. And the first one is, why do we see that some societies are able to take off earlier than others? And as a result of it, enormous inequality is emerging in the world economy. And the second is whether, in fact, we can generate some insights that can mitigate inequality across the globe. So let me start with the first question. Indeed, what we see 200 years ago is that some societies are prepared, if you wish, for the takeoff from stagnation to growth, and others have first faced some barriers in the process of accumulation of human capital and physical capital, and in the process of adoption of new technologies. And why is it so? So according to unified growth theory, much of it has to do with forces that operated in the distant past. And the journey of humanity explore four fundamental forces, so in fact five. First, the forces of colonialism, the importance of colonialism in generating an uneven development across the globe. The second force that I'm referring to is the role of institutions. Some societies are adopting growth-enhancing institutions, inclusive institutions. Other societies are adopting growth-retarding institutions, extractive institutions, and this contributes partly to the divergence. The third element that I'm focusing on is the cultural factor. Again, we see that in some regions of the world, cultural traits or cultural characteristics that are emerging tend to be more growth-enhancing than others. And this is certainly the case. But again, cultural traits are not manna from heaven. They're not exogenous. They are evolving as a byproduct of the process of development. They're evolving in relation to the geographical endowment that characterize the society. I move further back in human history and basically explore two additional forces. One of them is the onset of the Neolithic Revolution, the onset of the Agricultural Revolution. And there I show that, in fact, as suggested by Jared Diamond, differences in the transition from stagnation to growth can be partly related to the onset of the Neolithic Revolution, but in a very qualified fashion. And if you look at the prosperity across nations today, in fact, it is entirely unrelated to the timing of the Neolithic Revolution. So I conclude that, in fact, the Neolithic Revolution, the timing of the Neolithic Revolution, the timing of the Agricultural Revolution is not very important for the understanding of inequality today, although it is important for the understanding of the process of development in the pre-industrial era. And finally, I move and describe the last factor, which is the role of human diversity. And I make the argument that human diversity is a very fundamental force that affected economic prosperity. So as I said, there are a large number of forces that affected the process of development, but to a large extent, all these forces are important in order to understand the inequality as we see it across the globe. Now, to your second question, how can we basically use this knowledge to mitigate the gap between nations? One of the most important lessons from the journey of humanity is that if we would like to mitigate inequality across the globe, we would like to expedite the transition of less developed societies into the modern growth regime, we have to design a policy that is country-specific, history-specific, geography-specific, in order to expedite the transition. The ideas that were promoted in the past by the World Bank and the IMF and the Washington Consensus about one policy that will fit all nations at once is not appropriate. The main insight of the journey of humanity with respect to policy is that the policy will have to target the specific characteristics of each country, the geography of the place and how it affected culture and institutions, and the degree of diversity that is present in the place.
Throughout the fascinating journey of humanity, you suggest that people have experienced the devastating effects of several major disasters, such as severe infectious disease, 2 world wars, and so on, but are still able to recover rapidly every time after. What can it teach us today when humanity is facing several rising challenges right now?
Human ingenuity is ultimately permitting humanity to face these challenges, to overcome these challenges, and ultimately, when you look at the long arc of human development, the long arc of human development is really unaffected by these great tragedies. So at any point in time, if we think about, say, the tragedies of World War I or World War II, naturally individuals that are living through these tragedies are devastated for a prolonged period of time. But when we look at the grand arc of human development, ultimately the grand arc of human development is really unaffected by this, and humanity maintains its march forward nearly untouched. Now, when we think about the challenges that humanity is facing at the moment, what I learned by observing the past is that with some distance, the society and humanities will be able to overcome these challenges. And in fact, the journey of humanity will be sustained despite these great tragedies and great challenges that we face at the moment.
The COVID-19, climate change, and regional conflicts, will those challenges drag humanity back into some sort of stagnation? What risk does this pose to economic growth and prosperity?
Right. So this is an important question, particularly if we think about climate change. Climate change is an incredible challenge, and it will require a great amount of resolve, great amount of ingenuity, great amount of coordination to overcome. And in this respect, I think that one should be more concerned about climate change than previous challenges. But nevertheless, I'm still hopeful that humanity has the tools to overcome the current alarming trend in the context of climate. And what is it based upon? So it is based on several factors. The first one is that climate change is caused by people. And in fact, the population on planet Earth increased dramatically since the Industrial Revolution. It increased nearly eightfold since the Industrial Revolution. But what we see recently is that, in fact, most countries are experiencing major decline in fertility, and in many of them, fertility is below replacement level. And therefore, the size of the world population in the coming decades will start to decline, and therefore the pressure on the environment will be smaller than otherwise. Now, this is important because this will mitigate part of the current trend in climate change and will buy scientists with 3 or 4 decades to develop revolutionary technologies that can perhaps reverse this climate change. Now, it is very important to understand that human ingenuity was there to rescue us at many different junctures in human history. And I don't think that this will be very different at this juncture in human history. I think that 3-4 decades will allow us to develop, as I said, technologies that we cannot possibly envision at the moment, as was in the past. New technologies are not necessarily anticipated, but given the incentives, given the importance that we attribute to climate change, I think that these technologies will be there in time to rescue humanity. But this is, of course, conditional on the fact that there will be a great international cooperation to reduce the current level of carbon emission. There will be great education campaign that will teach each individual how to preserve the environment better than what we do at the moment.
Last but not least, what do you think of the prospect of our future development and prosperity? What factors will be critical?
Yes, so that's very interesting. And as I said, when I uncovered the wheels of change in the context of unified growth theory, I emphasized 3 fundamental forces. I emphasize the size of the human population, I emphasize technological progress, and I emphasize the composition of the human population. And I think that we will move into an era in which, in fact, 2 of these 3 factors will be very important, namely technological progress and the composition of the human population. So as we move into the future, I think that the reliance on flexible education that will permit individuals to navigate a rapidly changing technological environment will grow more rapidly, and therefore societies that will depart gradually from investment in vocational education and will emphasize more flexible education and greater importance on cognitive skills will be in a better position to advance technologies and to benefit these technologies. So in fact, when I think about future development and prosperity, again, I'm quite optimistic about the way that the world will advance forward. I think that we will see further acceleration in technological progress. I think that we will see greater investment, as I said, in education and in flexible education. But unfortunately, what we will see in the world during this time period is greater increase in inequality within societies. And the reason is that technological acceleration will increase the demand for special type of skills. And since these skills are not uniformly distributed across societies, it would imply that some individuals will gain more than others and great inequality may emerge in society. And this suggests that, in fact, societies will have to assure first that there is equality of opportunities, namely that each individual will be able to fulfill her potential to a full extent. But in addition, societies will have to be more generous and to support and to provide safety nets to those individuals that will not be able to contribute at the same level to this new era of technological progress. But overall, as I said, I expect rapid technological progress, greater prosperity, but unfortunately, this prosperity will be divided very unevenly across the population.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galor, for sharing your views with us today. As Dr. Galor said, technological progress and the composition of the population will be very important for development and prosperity as we move into the future. And rapid technological progress will lead to greater prosperity. That's all for today's show. See you.